So welcome back to the Diary of a CTO, where my guest today is Niteen Crawford-Prajapati, a technologist and privacy advocate and CPTO of Verifymy and founder of Ninja Owls. And Niteen's career spans everything from early ad tech to working in large corporations like Microsoft, and now he's leading startups and building privacy-focused verification systems. He's gone from helping some of the tracking technologies in the modern internet to creating tools that help people disappear from the internet entirely. And in this episode, we're going to talk a bit about the ethics of data, online identity, and the fine line between regulation and personal freedom, and what the future of that privacy might really look like. So Niteen, really wonderful to have you. How are you doing today?
Very well, thank you. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Not a problem. Lovely to have you. Lovely to have you. So Niteen, you are currently the CPTO of Verifymy, really innovative business that's doing building privacy systems and verification systems for the internet. Prior to this, you've had a whole host of different roles in senior leadership and hands-on technology across various different domains. So very, very keen to hear a little bit more about your journey today. So let's start with you, if we may, and tell us a little bit about yourself, your career in tech, and how it all started for you.
Yeah, it's interesting because I have a background in physics and computer networking, which I think is kind of in line with some of your other guests. I think there's like a trend.
Bit of a theme.
Yeah.
Not all, but some.
Yeah. And I think really kind of my initial interest, as sad as it is to say, is that I've always been quite a keen kind of like network type IT person. I've always been keen to understand like how the internet works. And so that's why I sort of pursued that study in my master's for comp sci and networking, to be like, right, well, how does it actually work? How do these packets and frames get from A to B, and how do they work? And it kind of like took me in like a direction completely that I didn't think, which is that I then landed in digital advertising after that, like I think a lot of people did during the early 2000s. So I worked for a small agency initially, and then moved to MySpace, which I may be showing my age at that point. But I was an engineer. I was the only engineer, actually, the only technical person outside the US for Europe at that point.
Wow.
Which was good fun. Now in hindsight, I would say it's probably one of my favorite jobs because it had such good perks.
Yeah,
Like,
I bet.
it had good secret parties, and it was just a case of where a lot of right people at the right time, really smart people. But yeah, largely like kind of like my background has kind of been like largely software engineering as well. So I'm a much better network architect and CTO than I am a software engineer these days. But yeah, it kind of has allowed me to be this person where, because I understand how the internet works, or how that kind of like core layer 1 all the way through to 7 works from a networking point of view, it served me really well in the companies I worked for since, because then tying it with software to be like, well, I know exactly how this works. So I've been very lucky to kind of avoid the classic pitfalls of, this doesn't work, and then you look at it and it's just like, oh, because there might not be the correct correlation between the software and the hardware at this point. So
do you feel there's a real just pick up on that point then, an advantage coming from a hardware background more so than a pure software background going into the role of technical leadership?
I think they both have their merits. I would say that that's a good question. I would say that somebody coming from a hardware and software background, I would say probably understands like ecosystem and how to build products from 0 to 1, maybe a bit better than somebody coming purely from a software background. Because the only reason I say that is because largely the way the internet works and operates, or all these systems that we've got around us, that tech, that hardware, doesn't change that much. But software, one day you're using this particular like database, the next day, something hot and fresh is on the scene, and you're trying to sort of use this new technology, but actually, it might not necessarily work with what you previously. So I always feel like, from a software point of view, like, because it's so fast moving and fast paced, I think they're better at like coming to market with new things, but necessarily if they work as well as something that's kind of like got a bit of more of a understanding around the hardware that it's actually operating on.
Yeah.
I would say maybe that product is less fancy, but like more stable
Yeah,
versus
yeah, yeah.
maybe the software side
Yeah,
of
fair
it.
point. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I cut across you there, but I was just interested to hear about. So, yeah, so talk us through a bit about some of the roles that you've had throughout your career from inception to where we are today.
Yeah. So I've been everything from, if we go chronologically, I was the IT person at the agency. I was a software and product manager and IT guy for MySpace across Europe, which was good fun. It ranged from this piece of software is broken, this ad isn't showing, to why isn't my PowerPoint showing, which was fine. It's a great way to. I think people get. I often think that people are just like, why are they asking me? I'm just like, this is such a good way. Whenever I talk to people, I'm like, such a good way to meet people that you wouldn't normally meet in, especially a big organization like that, when they're just like, we don't know why our PowerPoint's working. Let's go and ask the tech guy over there, even though he's got like nothing to do with this kind of thing. And then I moved kind of into more like solutions orientated based, like engineering. So kind of further from the back end, more forward to like the actual product itself. So post MySpace, I was at I did another startup. It was kind of the start of my startup journey, at a creative ad serving system, which is now Seismic, I believe. So for those that are listening, very boring, but yes, Seismic. And then the big item came where I made the switch from like sorry, there's Microsoft in between there as well. Sorry. Sorry.
Just that little chestnut.
Yeah, let me go back a step there. So post MySpace, I moved on to Microsoft, and I was there for a couple of years as an engineer on the creative side for their ad serving system, and then I think that's kind of where my I think frustration's a fair word, because I think, and it's not anyone else's fault but my own. It's just my own makeup of how I am, which is the frustration of waiting for things to happen. I'm impatient by nature, in a reasonable sense, I would say, but I think it kind of got to the point where, when you've got a software bug that is costing the company a couple of million a day, and the senior engineer can't be bothered to get out of bed 8 hours behind, despite that's what him being paid for, to push the change that I've already done for him. I had to take a long, hard look at myself, because I was just like, I'm not proud of myself, but I did lose my marbles at this point, and some not very nice things were said to this person. But I'm going to put that down to my early 20s to be like, dude, this is your job. And then this opportunity came along where people were just like, startup, and I was like, what's a startup? It's what we would have just called a small business, like before all the whole Silicon Valley jargon.
Yeah.
And so that kind of came across at about 2010, which is a company called AppNexus, which was like, it's an ad exchange. It's a very large ad exchange. It still exists. Full loop back to Microsoft, where it was acquired post AT&T and a few other places that it went to. But that journey was actually very, 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 very like character building for myself, which is, all of a sudden it was just two people in a room. We were two people in a room working for a company that had series funding of $50 to $100 million. So not small at all. And you've got to figure out everything. So at this point, I was the engineer, I was the solutions engineer, I was the implementation guy, I was the account manager, I was the janitor, I was the food shopping guy, it was whatever. And I soon realized that actually this is my jam, right? Like this is it. Like I don't like to be pigeonholed, and startup, I think, really gives you that opportunity to kind of like figure out, like, maybe you are better suited to being a role that you wouldn't necessarily been exposed to if you were in a corporate environment and just sort of given your, your senior, or sorry, your back end role or your engineering role or such. So that was really nice. I was there for a couple of years, and that team went from we were two people literally in Charlotte Street. By the time we left, we'd had an entire floor somewhere in Golden Square. So you're talking 150, maybe a bit more. So that was cool. That was cool to watch, because you're also hiring these people as well. And what did I know about interviewing at 25? Nothing. So it was kind of learn by doing.
That's a really good point. I mean, from that scale from 2 to 150, that's not many people can say that, right?
Yeah.
How were you assessing quality of talent to come and join you at that time, at that size? What do you remember, any sort of particular areas that were really poignant for you and important in terms of bringing people on board?
Yeah, I think, and I stay true to this now, which is, it's a feeling, right? Like, so when people are talking, I find that and I didn't know this about myself, I'm far more empathetic than I thought I would be in the interview process, because I could empathize with how nervous somebody could be, how you could easily not be talking about like how great you are because of nerves, or because you might be on a tangent, or you just had a bad morning. There's multiple things that can sort of derail your interview process, and you can be really great at them. So I found that, like, for me, I was quite more empathetic. I'd really dig in with people to be like, I've seen this, and here's a big shocking item. I would actually really read their CV and make notes before I'd go in, to be like, tell me about this, right? Like, this is your time to tell me about how awesome you are. So, go through it, and then, if they weren't quite getting it, I'd kind of like try and prompt them without kind of necessarily saying, like, giving them the itinerary of like what I'm looking to hear. And then the other thing is that, like, I concentrate quite a lot on them as a person, right? So, in this day and age, right, like, you can write anything on LinkedIn, right? Whether it's true or not is a different matter. But, if somebody can genuinely articulate their passion about a hobby, or something that they built, something that they're interested in, that gives you a lot more insight into kind of who they are as a person, which is, for me personally, I would say that, like, some of the best people I've hired have been passionate about, let's say, mountain biking. And I'm just like, tell me about that. And they're just like, well, my bike is this. And I'm like, tell me about the suspension. Tell me about, like, what derailleur you've got it. Like, so you can kind of get down there and you can see them being really passionate. And I'm just like, so for me, I take away from that, I'm just like, well, you're quite detail orientated. You really thought about this bike and how the setup is, which is, it wasn't balanced. So you really dug into this and found, like, what the problem was. And then you found the solution. Then you found multiple avenues for that solution. So, and so that tells me a lot about it, which is that if I put you into, let's say, a pre-sales environment, I could confidently be like, I know this person likes to dig and kind of find the crux of the problem, and also can hear between what's not being said, or reading between the lines in that regard.
Yeah.
So I like to think that, and take this to the day, and as advice I give to other people, I'm just like, like, it's a two-way street, right? So you should be equally open to kind of like helping them articulate their best answer that they possibly can, to then really find out if they're a good fit for your company.
Yeah, fair play. Well, it sounds like a bit of a natural if you were doing that at the 20s, so fair play. Good.
Yeah. I mean, wouldn't have seen that one coming, but yeah.
Cool. So sorry, I derailed you again. You would so you grew the business to 150 people in Golden Square.
Yeah. And then I got picked up by a company called Freewheel, which is for all intents and purposes, I guess it's a TV, video, and streaming ad serving system. And again, a bit full loop, and I'm sure everybody feels this way at the moment as well, which is that when people talk about network, it really is. It really is. Like, I didn't believe it. I was just like, well, I'll make my own path, and blah blah blah, and headstrong. And I'm just I actually worked with Freewheel at MySpace, and then kind of fall back around. They were just like, we're opening an office in the UK for Europe. Would you like to be the first and second person on the ground? And I was just like, yeah, I've done this before, sure, kind of thing. And so, all of a sudden at like 28, we're doing this all again.
How did you feel about that, going back to the start? Was that something that excited you?
It was so awesome.
Yeah.
Like, because you get to the point where at 150 people, it's great, but you get to do less, because now you've got people in function, in role, in department. So all of a sudden, like, me going to go out and sort of maybe doing like QBRs as part of the product team, or being just the only product person, didn't happen anymore. And that's really insightful, depending on where you work in any section, right? Whether you're an engineer, whether you're a product person, whether you're a salesperson, account manager, solutions engineer, like, hearing the voice of the customer is kind of everything.
Yeah.
So yeah, it got to the point where I was just like, yeah, no, I'm ready. Like, and because I knew the product, and I knew how robust it was and how good they were, and how the background of those people, like their pedigree from Google and DoubleClick, I was like, yes, absolutely. Like, I'm on board. I already kind of was ready to do that. And that was kind of, that was good fun. So that was 2012 to 2017, 2018. So that was, again, two people in a room. I think this podcasting room is actually bigger than the office that we had. Originally, it was just two desks crammed together. By the time that finished, Freewheel had been acquired by Comcast. Some software of mine had been acquired by Freewheel. And then we went from 2 to, it must have been about 1,000.
Really?
Yeah, that was huge, because what happened is, once that post Comcast acquisition happened, because Comcast is quite a sprawling corporation outside of the US as well.
Yeah, it's huge, isn't it?
They decided they want to put all their entities together under one roof. And so it was kind of, it was interesting, because that was like a whole humongous floor. It felt corporate almost overnight in that instance, because we'd had everybody there. And so we had this huge floor in, I think it was in the Strand. Yeah, it was towards the Strand, like one whole like top floor with a like not a balcony. It was called a roof garden type of item. So yeah, that was interesting because that was I would have said that was kind of that was my setup for being a CTO at that point. I was very lucky to sort of land that role because the people there really smart, really went on to do other things post acquisition because the original when I joined Freewheel at that time I think I was somewhere in the 70s, early 70s employee number.
Right.
And so you kind of really got to know everybody to that level. And you know where people say like right people, right place, right time. I actually genuinely believe that. Like I'm a science person by heart, but like there is something about fate that I can't shake. And so you know these people were amazing. So to take a company of just 70 that turned over in excess of $1 billion, you know, like because it had all the big labels, all the big logos on it, like ESPN, Disney, Amazon, you name it, like every single US broadcaster, MVPD kind of thing I had that, and then they were branching that out here. So when I first joined, they were just like, "Here's Channel 4 and Sky." I was like, "Okay." So you know, I was brought on to like save the relationship and all this kind of stuff, and it was really like deep end, like straight into the fire with them being really unhappy and me being like, "I'm," you know, you're just like, "I'm brand new, so I'm also going to get things wrong." So this is going to be terrible. This is going to be the worst like onboarding ever because they're already mad, and now they're going to be even more like frustrated that they're just like, oh, by the way, here's this new person. He's also going to be looking after this and fixing all your stuff for you, and I'm just like, cool, awesome, thanks.
How did you handle that? Because I know in the past we've spoken about this before that you kind of describe yourself as a bit of a parachute CTO. You know, you're kind of coming into situations to fix things, and you know, what sort of approach do you take in that scenario where how do you get the best outcome and get sort of win hearts and minds as quickly as possible?
Yeah, it's actually not rocket science right at this point. A lot of it is listening. It really is. And when you come into that kind of engagement as well, whether it was with Freewheel or even just now, a lot of it is around communication, which is clarifying. A lot of people, and I was given this advice myself, which I really took to heart, which is it's okay to say you don't know. And I think that's kind of a key part of it. So when you go into places and they say, can you do X, Y, and Z? I'll make notes. I don't know, but I hear you. I understand what you're asking for, and clarification is a big one because I think, and this kind of ties in with the whole communication point, which is in parachute CTO events that I've been into, it's where like, you know, the product team and the CEO have been massively misaligned, or that the CEO or the salespeople don't know how to sell the product, or engineering don't understand what they're really actually building because there's been very little communication. And it's a classic place pretty much in every role I've been into where I've been a CTO, which is that the big thing is like, guys, are we speaking the same language? Are we saying the same thing? And is our North Star like really actually, are we all aligned on our North Star? No, then we've got some work to do, right? Which is that like where we, first of all, you sort of look at where we misaligned, why we misaligned, and then how do you get to like, how do we do course correction to get to that point of like, right, now we're all singing off the same page, now we're good to go. And that's even before you start to touch tech, right? Like it is largely just like with experience now, we first come in and say like, are we all saying the same thing? So there's, you know, in this instance, there was a lot of interviewing and just kind of understanding the problem, which will be different depending on the person that you speak to.
Yeah, I think that's a great approach actually. Like you say, the tech, I guess, is secondary to the means to the end, isn't it? It's really about, you know, like I say, going in and understanding the situation in its depths and really the different stakeholders and their different motivations, right? And ensuring that everybody is aligned. I think it's a very good point that you make. With regards to the next stage of your career after you'd done yet another startup, well, I guess we'll call that a scale up. That's definitely a scale up to get to 1,000 people. How did you feel then, and what did you feel would be the next kind of sensible step for you, having done it twice?
Yeah, and I think that it kind of came to a head, right? To be honest, which is that after doing Fruit and Comcast, that same itch came up, which when I was 14, 16, which is I'm quite fine. I've got some good ideas, quite out to building them. Like that itch came where I was like, I think I need to go solo, you know, or go and do my own thing. Which is startups are great, but you're kind of still like constrained by like coming into someone else's product vision thinking and everything else. So I kind of wanted to go solo, and so for frame of reference as well, like at school, before you can legally work. Me and a friend had a ringtone website. You know, we had the old Nokias.
Oh yeah.
And that was great. So it was fine. So we're making, whatever pounds you make on top of that. But where we actually really struck gold is the ads that we put on the website.
I
Because
bet.
at that point, they were largely kind of unheard of. It's not like the whole digital ecosystem now. And in a month, this place was raking in on like total with ads about £3,000. What does a 14-year-old do with like splitting, £3,000 with his mate? 14, like we had PlayStation games, but then you kind of get to that point where you're just like,
Got more.
you go, yeah, literally. Now what? So that kind of like entrepreneurial itch kind of came back, and so it was a case of where I'd kind of wanted to go back and see what I could build, and that's what fractional like CTOing kind of gives you a safe space for a little bit, which is you can come in with your ideas, build them, see if it works, and if it doesn't, then you're kind of like you've got like a safety net a little bit, and then that kind of ended, I think, towards like I would say when I started Digital Architects, which is kind of the item, which is that, okay, cool. Pretty much every company you go to is just missing something, right? Whether it's documentation, whether it's a process, a framework, an actual product, technical, let's say best practice in terms of like implementation. And by that, I mean, literally like you need a different database. I'm going to help you put that in and do it. These are all largely, and I joke about this, but it's kind of true, which is that when you go into these companies, a lot of them they're doing really well. And it's very, anyone that says that like, a business running badly, shame on them, because it takes a lot of hard energy, work, heart, sweat, tears, everything to get a business running. So if you're turning over any kind of money, it's you should be proud of it.
Yeah.
But what the habit is, and I think this is true of everybody, including myself, which is if it's not broken, don't fix it, don't touch it, don't look at it, just leave it if it works, kind of thing. And that's what I come in to do, which is I'm like, right, there's much more quality of life here. So what you're seeing is that like, and it goes back to a bit of a classic COGS model, which is let's see how you're spending your money.
Yeah.
This person's spending 20 hours of their time doing something, and that's costing you, X, Y, and Z backs out to your salary. So it was less about like pinning and understanding like how people are spending their time, but like what's that return on investment. And I have a saying that I've used forever, which is like, I work smarter, not harder. So how can we free up their time for them to do more interesting things, right? So if it means if they're spending 20 hours in tickets, things like that, and writing tickets from manually from Zendesk or whatever their ticketing system to Jira, then we can automate that, like, and so a lot of it is like I really go into sort of like macro to micro to be like, right, actually how are you, I understand what the problem is from the high level, but how is this a problem? Like, show me why this is a problem now. And so a lot of that would be like going in and really dismantling systems, which I think everybody should do in their lifetime. Go in and actually sort of take a step back and be like, am I working the best way? And you'll find that a lot of people have ideas and they just don't get the time to execute them. And so often in this parachute CTO roles, and having come from like this scale up, the largest value I provide is giving people breathing space. Because you come in as a fresh person, I can come into the CEO or the board of directors and say, right, here's my audit reports. This is what these guys need to do. This is the current situation. Here's what we are articulating. This is what we would like to do. This is what the the end point or outcome of this will be. What I need from you is to stop harassing them, right? We can't do this if you're just breathing down their neck. They need time. So, and I'll work with everybody in that point because the business just can't stop, right? Like that's the kind of thing. But like, we can look at backlog and say, right, well, actually, let's just delete all of this stuff because we're never going to get around to it. And this kind of stuff. So it's me helping internally first to buy as much time as possible by kind of like making sure they prioritize correctly, and then going to their superiors and all the people that have hired me to say, right, we need time and a bit of space. Like this is like doing a U-turn in a tanker in the middle of we've got the middle of the ocean, but it's going to take some time to get back around. So largely, I think that like my biggest, the biggest addition I come in is like understanding the problem, but then kind of backing the people that need to make the changes to buy them the time that they need to make the changes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I really, I respect that answer, and I think it's really refreshing to hear that you're focusing first and foremost on the people, the relationships, their dynamic, first and foremost, rather than straight to the technical. And this is where you're going wrong. And I think it's also a really good point you make. Sometimes you've got to be that voice of, a little bit of a pattern interrupt with the, there's obviously a dynamic at play between the board or the leadership and the rest of the people in the business. And sometimes you've got to come in there and have those relatively difficult conversations, right? That maybe they don't feel empowered or able to have. But yeah, like I said, buying time and just not being necessarily a yes person, and obviously just feeling what you.
I think if you spoke to a lot of people, they'd be like, the last thing I am is a yes person. And I think there's also like, I think this is true of every single industry. Without your people, what do you have? You nothing.
Totally. Totally agree. Yeah, and that's one of the things that I think it rings true across. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about the age of AI momentarily, but rings true across all industries and domains, doesn't it? It's about engagement and getting the best out of people, which fundamentally makes a business successful first and foremost. So I totally agree with that. Cool. So after that, what was the next step of your journey?
So I came in. So my parachute CTOing days kind of came back a little bit, even though I was kind of running a couple of companies at the time. And I kind of accidentally fell into, as is a bit of theme with my jobs, actually accidentally fell into them, which is around computer vision and a lot of AI, what you would class as, what I still class as machine learning. That kind of like, I wouldn't even say like I was before the event of it. It was kind of like the first 25% of it, like ramping very heavily kind of thing. I entered there. And so I'd done a lot of work with like content providers and doing like automation, categorization, a lot of like understanding of the context of the content for TV providers. Like for example, you scan a movie and you can extract from it like who the actors are, actresses, whether the mood is sexy, romantic, angry, blah blah. And a lot of this stuff is subjective, right? Which is kind of like also a theme that on goes with AI generally, which is that like unless it's a mathematical like outcome, black and white, I wouldn't say we're there yet with subjective output from an AI. So that was the first part, and then we kind of I moved on to like a facial recognition company, which was super interesting and a very hard problem to solve if you open the can of worms too much, which is that like grabbing data is the hardest part, right? Of any model, right? And I think I'm sure your listeners are very, very, very aware of this, which is the data is the output of ML, an AI, anything is only as good as the data that goes in. Hence why, all these big companies are basically scraping the internet, right? Or Reddit, I guess at this point. So it's only as good as the input. And so how do you capture faces, right, as a training model? And so the company I work for we figured this out. You show content for 1,000 hours and you capture their face, then you do a MetaMask around this to sort of like measure points. And so then it got to the point where that actually, if you wanted to extract emotion from this, incredibly hard. Like, so there'd be somebody smiling in the UK is going to be somebody look entirely different from somebody smiling in, let's say, Korea, right? And then it gets even deeper, which I opened up this can of worms, which is okay, great. So now I think I've got this, which is it's by national, it's by location, it's by race, right? So you kind of got like a parent-child thing. No. So, I had a rude awakening where like, if you're in a city in Japan, the way that somebody finds something funny in the same city might differ from just north and south of the city.
Oh, really?
So yeah, all of a sudden you've just extrapolated this problem infinitely, because then you realize that actually this is all about individualism, which is even if you're from the same city, even if you're from the same family, even if you're twins, your facial expressions will be different depending on like what you're looking at, because you interpret feelings differently. And so you sort of I looked at this and thought, no, I'm gonna put the lid back on this, because like I think the highest level of just like having by race, like Caucasian, Asian, Black, is kind of like I can see why that top level grouping has occurred, because if you go down too deep, it is infinite and also unsolvable at this point.
A really good point, actually. I never really thought about that, but it's so true, isn't it? I mean, I guess it fundamentally depends on the personality of the individual, right? Some people have got a very dry sense of humor, so when they find something funny, they find it funny, but actually they don't crack a smile or whatever. And yeah, it's actually a very good point.
Yeah, and you look at like I use this as the example, which is Jimmy Carr, right? He's very dry, very sarcastic, and often he delivers it with quite a serious face because he's probably making fun of someone.
Yeah.
If you ran that through an AI, like sort of facial emotion estimation, it's just going to be like angry, because that's kind of what he looks like, because maybe he's frowning a little bit as he delivers it. So it's one of these things where it interests me greatly when I see these headlines, about like people sort of using ChatGPT as a like an actual therapist. Sorry, using it as a therapist. And I'm just like, right, but it kind of really doesn't understand subjectivity and emotional complexity. And I've said this multiple times in most of the companies I've worked in. I'm like, we don't even understand how the human brain works fully. So, when we talk about like Gen AI. Like I think we've got some more learning to do, and a bunch of stuff. So yeah, it's kind of that led me into this AI kind of path where I'm kind of now where I'm at, and also now it's kind of what my company does to a degree as well, like outside of Verifymy as well. So
Cool.
yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that then. So, where do you want to start? Should we talk about Verifymy or?
Yeah, they're actually closely aligned. So I started a company called Ninja. People ask me how I named the company. Very simple. I like owls and I like ninjas. That was it. And that went.
You remember it, that's for sure.
Yeah, that was it. And then really, I just wanted a cool logo. That's kind of
Yeah,
how.
like that.
I've got some.
Work.
I had some pretty cool logos done. Anyway, so Ninja Owl as a company is it is a privacy and online digital footprint reduction company. And there's a billion of these out there. You've got the likes of Delete Me and things like that, which are largely focused on the US, and because their data practices are quite poor, depending on the state that you're in, which is that you can find out anything about anybody. Ours is a bit more white glove, let's say, in this route. So we only service people who are high net worth individuals, people in need, and kind of people that are the focus of their digital footprint, and their family life and anything else being extracted is kind of like something that shouldn't necessarily be available to the public,
Right.
for their own choice, right? In that kind of thing. And so we do largely OSINT technology, right? So open source public network stuff. So it starts as simple as we Google the person's name and then we show and have a look and then we dig in from that, right? And so we kind of build a graph system based on this person to say, right, well, we found you, and then we kind of, so it's a mix of like OSINT, ethical hacking, and kind of pen testing.
Yeah.
Which is then we'll go and dig in deeper and deeper and deeper into this person, this individual, and say, right, well, actually, we know that you've been hacked. Sorry, we know that you've been breached. We know this because of how they've been pawned, and we pull all these data. Were there any passwords associated to this? Were they hashed? Were they unhashed? Were they plain? We'll then test those passwords, and then we'll kind of almost go like, horizontally and vertically, like kind of test it further. Which is, if your password is 123, maybe change it to 456. So we'll start to kind of really go deep on this. And what we come out with is like a graph system, basically a mind map, and we present this to the client to say, here's subject X. They are very popular in the portable loo industry, because that's the inception of this company, which I'll loop back around to. And then when we dug in further, we found out that we found out your address, we found out where your wife works, we found where your children went to school. Now this is information that does not need to be accessed or be available to anybody. And like everything in the world, which is that you build these tools for good, but someone will always find a nefarious purpose for this. So, and this kind of ties in back, which is something that my dad said to me very early on, which is when we first got the internet installed, which is, who controls this? Genuine question from my dad. He's a finance professional, not really a sort of technical background kind of person. And I was like, oh, I don't know. Like, it's not me though. It goes on to someone. He was just like, right, but then don't ever put anything on there that you don't want, exposing it. It just one of those moments where, even as a teenager, you don't listen to your parents, but it just stuck with me immediately. I was like,
well, it makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. And so we give the advice, the same thing to, their clients, their children. We're like, guys, I've worked with Snapchat. They do not delete anything. Let me be very clear to the listeners. There's a lot of machine learning that runs on that. And then for those like sort of plugged in a bit more on that, like that texting, Silicon Valley, the TV program with hot dog or pizza, that's actually quite accurate. They draw that from that, right? So it's a case of where don't put things on the internet. So we help remove that information, right? So we'll go, and it is very white glove. It's a lot of it can be automated, and there's some tricks that we have up our sleeve that are USPs that other clients can't do, like Delete Me, due to relationships that we have in the industries. But we will try and get most of that stuff removed, deleted. Now, it's that there is an ethical implication here, because we have an ethics board, which is that before we work with any client, I will run every single client through our ethics board.
Right.
So there's the classic ones, which is if somebody comes and asks me, they've done jail time for a crime, whether they committed or didn't commit, is that in the public's? Should that be in the public domain? Should people know about that? Yes, we believe so. So often we've had to turn people away, even where they've been innocent, where we said, but this is kind of the makeup of your narrative, to be honest, right? You're never going to be able to shake this full stop, because a DBS check will simply bring that up. So we don't work with people trying to kind of like erase their past. What we're trying to do is like make sure that they're safeguarding their family, and their loved ones, their kind of their right to having some privacy around information that they can't necessarily or didn't know that was on the internet, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so it comes back to the, the sort of overarching item here is that, like, coming from ads, I was unfortunately one of, like, the people that kind of built that technology that tracks you across the internet. So when people say I spoke about toothpaste and then I got an advert for toothpaste, yes, like that.
That's you, is it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, unfortunately,
Thanks for that.
having worked on, like, through the biggest ad servers, it was just like, and that was my turning point. Once I finished it, Comcast, I was just like, I can't do this anymore. It's really well paid and it's great, and I met some fantastic people, but there's just something from an ethics point of view, like, just deep ingrained in me, that having been a network engineer, I'm just like, just because that information's there doesn't mean it needs to be, gathered and monetized and this kind of thing, or to the degree where we are now, right?
Yeah.
Let's be clear, like, Facebook are not the first people to the party to this. They're the ones with the worst reputation for it, whether it's deserved or not. But, like, MySpace, we were building audience segments about, how people interacted with pages, whether they were, they like rock music, hip hop, all this kind of stuff, and you would then serve them that specific ads that tailored to that. And so it got to that point where very early on, that's 2008, so it's been around for a very long time. So I think once I got to that point, I was just like, no, I'm going to build the antithesis to this, which is in addition to kind of reducing the footprint, we also have a few hardware options, which is that on the move or at home, we will strip every single piece of tracking software out of it. So we do it to the best of ability without breaking things. So it means that you won't be tracked when you get back into your home. You won't be listened to. Your TV doesn't need to do content scanning and things like this kind of thing, and will block, like, really to the network level, anything that's unnecessary. And you'd be surprised some of the things that we've seen, like the fridge pinging back to its provider, like 15, 16 times an hour, and you're like, what could possibly be going on in the fridge that requires that kind of, like, information passed back? So yeah, we do a very thorough item for this, because I think it comes back to the thing, which is that if something's free, you're the product. That's one thing. And I think the other item that I've seen change, which kind of really brought the company to the forefront that we talk about when we engage with clients, is that somehow we've come into this shift where people expect to know about your life versus, like, having to engage with you to find out about your life, right? And Facebook definitely was the one that kind of, like, brought that to the mainstream in that regard, which is that people love putting their photos up. Even in MySpace, you could do all this sort of stuff. Like, we'll say MySpace was like there. It's kind of, they've got a lot of those ideas now, which is kind of funny. But it was Facebook that kind of really brought it to the mainstream about, like, sharing, and then Instagram and all these things. So all of a sudden, people expect to know about your life, right? And one of the first things you speak to anybody, right, if they go on a date or something, they'll be like, oh, I look for their Instagram, I look for their Twitter, sorry, their X, look for everything. So we've got to that point where just, like, we don't believe that. And this is a belief versus, like, how just humanity operates, which is that privacy is not a right. Sorry, privacy is a right. It shouldn't be that it's confused for, like, you're hiding something, right? And I use a really terrible analogy, so apologies in advance for your listeners, which is the analogy I use is that do you have a door in your bathroom? And they're like, yes. And I'm like, why? I was like, we all do the same thing, right? We all have the same bodily function, so why do you need a toilet door? They're just like, well, and I'm like, right, for privacy, right? So you just because you're doing the same thing doesn't mean everyone in the world needs to know about it. And I think we've got to that expectation where people kind of, like, assume that they can just pry into people's lives, and that's a big thing, which is that for a lot of people that's not the case. And so the origin story, come back to this so I can close this off for you, which is that we were on a holiday and we just got chatting to someone. It turns out that he provided portaloos for things like Glastonbury, right? So very, very did very well. Right? Like, let's just put it that way, right? Like,
we need a fair few of those.
Yeah, and repeat business, right, for sure. And so got talking to him, and I couldn't remember his name for life. Like, and so you went googling because he was lovely, and then all of a sudden there was all this detail about him and his kids, and I said to him, I was just like, oh, by the way, do you know that there's all this information? And he works in portaloos, right, and he's got a completely different skill set to me, and he was just like, I have no idea. And he was like, can I remove it? And I was like, there's a business here somewhere.
Yeah.
Like, with people that, like,
someone who can.
Yeah. And so, like, Jen Pop as well, like, I'm very lucky that I volunteer at Wimbledon Library, and I get to meet, like, everybody, all walks of life. And actually surprised me. And I think that's just from the bubble that I've been in for so many years, which is that the general population, like, the technical aptitude, quite low.
Yeah.
Right? Like, there'd be people that came in and said, can you teach me how to use email? Great. Do you have email and password? No. I don't have an email address. And I'm like, oh, okay, right. So we need to go, like, all the way from the start. And these people were not, like, not grandmothers or
No.
you know elderly people. These were people like that were tradies, any walks of life. You know, they were just like, I just wasn't taught this. I'm not very good with tech, and I'm like, fine,
Yeah.
no problem. Like you got to. Everyone has a first day, right? So let's start with that. So that's where like the inception of this entire company came along. And so we are a privacy first company. And so this led me on to being contacted by where I am now as well, which is Verifymy, so, which is a child safeguarding and online safety company. So as you will have seen from the 25th of July, the Online Safety Act came in, which requires any publishers or any kind of like software internet company. I think yeah, well, it's anything online basically that has mature content to now be age gated. And I think it's interesting because it took me a lot of time to reconcile this because I'm a very private person and my company specializes in privacy. And this company is asking you for your ID to access things for that are perceived to have an adult nature.
Mm.
Now, the definition of adult nature is incredibly subjective. It's also very dependent, and we won't go too into politics at all, but we're seeing kind of like more of a conservative viewpoint in the world maybe at the moment, and this is how politics works. It kind of leans one way or the other, and then
Yeah.
there's cyclical items that happen with this. But what we're seeing on this front is that now there's access to things on Reddit that for women's like menstrual care that are now behind paywalls, and they shouldn't be, right? Like everybody should have equal access to information, not put behind there just because you're happen to be describing something that you think is adult.
Yeah.
And that's not to be confused with like adult material like pornography, which should it be age gated? I'm not here to make that decision, right? I'm just here to build the software. But what I'm committed to is making sure that people don't lose their privacy over it. So I don't believe in giving my identification over to access adult items. I think it's not how the internet was founded and built. However, and this is the kind of reconcile process, which is I really had to sit and think about this at length because growing up, I had a different internet experience to what kids do now, and the level of material, the explicitness of the material, all this kind of stuff. Like you can go onto TikTok and find beheading videos, right?
Yeah.
Like intentionally or not, like you can, right?
Yeah.
You can go to Telegram and find all these places. That's not the internet that I necessarily grew up with. You could find that stuff if you really, really wanted to, but it would
Take a lot, yeah.
the barriers to entry were much higher. And so it's a case of now where like how do we balance this for everybody? Because is it government overreach? I don't know, right? Like if I took a sort of a step back and tied this in with digital ID cards and other things that have been proposed, I would say yes. I would say that we are getting to a stage of where the government or maybe there's a bit too much kind of like monitoring that happens at this point, right? And again, like your privacy is being eroded, right? We've seen that with the request from the government to Apple for the backdoor for encrypted based like items, which again, no such thing as a backdoor. If it's used by a good guy, it can be used by a bad guy.
Yeah. Totally.
So yeah, we're at that stage now where like Verifymy is it's a great product. So we try and do things quite frictionlessly. And by that I mean that our first option to authenticate you as over 18 doesn't require ID. We will use that as the last resort. And I've got something further out coming, which means that neither side will know details. So for example, you can invoke an authentication. That website, let's say it's an adult-based, material-based website, so adult content, they don't know who you are. And equally, the provider or the system that we're using won't know what website you're using.
Interesting.
So it's like a double blind methodology here, which I think is healthy, right? Because regulation moves quickly. Regulation is also kind of iterated. It can iterate quite quickly.
Yeah.
I would say the Online Safety Act has its flaws in comparison to like the newly instated New York one, which they kind of did, I think, quite well. But don't hold me to that. I need to sort of do a bit more, reread that a couple of times. But the other side of that is that regulation also disappears, right? And the new government comes in, they might just decide that the Online Safety Act is a step too far or a step too little, right? So all of a sudden, it could be that like this system isn't required at all, and everybody just rolls back to where they were. And the other side of like any kind of system, and when I joined Verifymy, is that it's one of these things where it doesn't matter what industry you've been in, whether it's advertising, whether it's this, it's an arms race, right?
Yeah, of course.
If people want something, they'll find a way to get it.
Yeah.
Right? As you did growing up, you always find loops and the fence, and you get through them. So VPNs, obviously, unsurprisingly, it's the first thing I said was like, you should buy stock because they're going to go up. And then the government were outraged, like people using VPNs, and I'm just like, I'd probably bet that most of your politicians are probably using the VPNs to get what they needed as well, right? Because they certainly don't want to hand over their identification. So where we are now is like, we're at that stage where I'm hoping to kind of build like something that kind of meets both privacy, but also keeps politicians, governments, and everybody else in between as happy as possible without having to like degrade your privacy. So that's kind of where we are today. And so I've very much moved in from tracking people to now like basically trying to absolve them from any kind of
I love that though. I think that's a really great story that you've seen both sides of the coin, and innately then you understand the problem, and obviously you're probably best placed to create the solution around it as well. But I do think that people's relationship with the internet, it is going to become more and more important. And I think there is so much ignorance out there still about data, how it's used and where it's stored, and what level of privacy we have online. I think it's a great service which you're providing, and I think it's going to become more and more important at the end of the day. But I also agree with you that and I respect the fact it was obviously a not a difficult decision, but one you had to think about, because I guess there's the the other side of the coin of the level of privacy that we have with something like Verifymy. But as a dad of 2 daughters, if somebody goes, do you think the internet should be a safe place? I'm thinking, well, yeah, like my need for privacy and I guess probably becomes secondary to actually the greater good. But again, respect your viewpoint there, and obviously like what you're talking about there with you shouldn't need to have to with technology and the way things are evolving, we shouldn't necessarily need to have to hand over ID for that to be the case. And it sounds like you're definitely barking up the right tree with that, and a step ahead of the rest of the game.
Yeah, and I have to say, like, it was probably the most complex set of user interviews I've had to do for precisely that, which is, this isn't just like selling B2B, right? This is like the end user is somebody that has kids, somebody that doesn't have kids, somebody that maybe has a particular fetish, right? And there's the entire scale of the types of people accessing the type of information. It could be anything from a young girl coming into into womanhood, and she needs to look at like menstruation, and is it the right thing? Because it's a very confusing time, right? Like they need information to understand that like what's happening to them is natural, fine, and reassuring, right? Like this is the kind of thing. And putting up a gate to that, like all you're doing is forcing people to find it in other places. And when you typically do that, it's to say that like those other sources of information might not be as legitimate, right?
Absolutely.
So it's a case of, we're hoping to kind of allow people to get the information that they need in a safe manner. But you're absolutely right. Like that it's a different. It's really different viewpoint depending on like the person's background and their family life and everything else that goes with that.
Yeah, totally. But like I said, that double blind idea seems like to me a very sensible way of doing it. How do you see the kind of future of online identity and privacy and looking ahead? I know it's always difficult to predict in the times that we're living in, but what do you sort of see 5-10 years down the line about how that whole landscape looks to you?
I actually think it's going to be, and I'm conflicted on this a little bit. I think it's going to become the norm, right? And I use a very grounding item here, right? So payments on your phone, right? It was a case of where before, like, you had to know your PIN number. Cool, no problem. Then it became contactless. Great, no problem. And then there's that kind of mix between people still using contactless and then phones. I can't remember the last time I used my card or my PIN to make a payment, right? And
same.
that's the case. And I think the thing about that is that nobody really saw that coming, right? So when the whole item of Apple Pay or Google Wallet and Pay came out, people just like, cool, like didn't think it would take off. Actually, it turns out that really, like, over time, your entire life is on your phone, right, to a degree. And so I've been speaking to a lot of countries, right, and their governments at the moment around like what they're doing for digital identity. And actually, it's actually the other way around. A lot more countries have digital identities than I actually realized. So, we look at Estonia, where Kyrgyzstan has just been, and they're kind of the pioneers, right? In the regards that like they're classed as like a very digital first country now, right? They made those right decisions a while back to upgrade their infrastructure and everything else that goes with it. So I actually think that our identification will become digital. I think it will be housed on your phone, and I actually think it will become a bit of a norm in regards to like carrying it with you and it being used for things, right? And so I hesitate to. I hope it doesn't necessarily affect everything online, because as for all the reasons I've given you, which is that it's chucking the baby out with the bathwater in terms of the information levels and everything else. But
Yeah.
for example, let's say you go into a bar and they need to ID you. It'll be as simple as just tapping your phone on a reader and it just says 18, not 18, right? Kind of thing. I think it will get to that point where I think it will just be a standard thing, right? Like you just tap with your watch or your phone. And so I think and the privacy side of me is just like, that's also terrible, right? Because it means that everything can be tracked, right? Like, and there's that kind of dystopian Black Mirror type thing, which, and I've worked in China for a number of years as well, which is that, do you then have a social credit score, right? Which is that, does it allow you to get into things? Does it allow you to get loaned? Like that Black Mirror episode I don't think it's too far off, because in China it kind of is that, right?
But, exactly, yeah.
Like the entire thing, which is, so does it promote good behavior? I don't know. Like, I don't know what the psychological aspect and what that kind of like impact is in terms of humanity and behavior and things like that. I'm just not qualified to know about that or understand that even slightly. But what I do think is that, I do believe that actually we'll end up, everything will be on our wallet. Like, that's kind of my prediction.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with you, and I love the fact that I think you're in the right place insofar as you've obviously got a very balanced view of the way you're looking at things on both sides of the coin, and I think that's obviously going to lead to, well, just purely from a software perspective, probably the best class software. But no, I totally agree with you. It's always going to be that elements of technology evolving to streamline convenience, and of course, your mobile phone it makes sense, doesn't it, that it would be there. But again, it's that element of, with that level of data, that level of power, there's always a risk it can fall into the wrong hands and be used in the wrong way, which again, very subjective when you sort of talk about ethics. But there is that worry. Like I said, you can see a lot of communist countries in the world today abusing data in that sort of way. So
and just to sort of exactly, like, I echo that point so heavily, which is that then recently you would have seen that like Discord has an issue, right, with leaked identification that's been whether it's from a third party, like, I'm not going to go into that, but that's exactly the problem, right? And this is something that every provider, including Verifymy, it's something I've taken into incredible consideration, which is, if we start to kind of do this identity checks and things like that, then it has to be a zero storage policy, right? So we don't keep it. It's erased immediately, because that risk of keeping it to do any kind of training, first of all, like, that's not my MO, that's not how I operate businesses. But also, second of all it takes is one hack, and all of a sudden that's people's pictures, driving licenses, address, and like, all of a sudden, like, the fraud aspect is incredible, right? Like, it's and so it's a case of where this is the other balance, which is that, like, the ID kind of space and all this kind of verification, it kind of does need some tightening. I think that right now it's just you meet these kind of policies a bit like ISO. This one's called ACCS, and you're accredited. But at the end of the day, like, again, it's just a policy that you're working towards, like, just ticking the boxes for. It doesn't actually necessarily mean that, like, your data is being stored and held in the way that it should be, and or sort of erased when it should be. So I'm cautiously optimistic is really where I'm.
Nice way to phrase it. But no, I think it's a super interesting topic, and you shared a lot of value today, and certainly got my hamster in my wheel turning. So thank you very much for that. And I guess I like to draw to a close every episode with the same question, if you would care to indulge, which is, what would you say is the one favorite piece of advice that you've received throughout your life? You've shared a couple already, so I don't mind if you would like to revisit, or whether you got another one off the top of your head. But if you got one you can share, that would be great.
One of the last pieces of advice I got, and I actually stole this. Thank you, Doug. Which is, every company I go into, one of the first questions I ask, and I ask myself this, is that given a situation, do you want to strengthen a strength or strengthen a weakness? And they both come with like their pros and cons, right? Which is that if you're not necessarily doing something well, should you be? Right. And it's a bit like, learning any kind of sport or things like that. You kind of are terrible when you start off, but also, you know, you kind of progressively get better. But like in the business world, it's a case of where it's very easy to strengthen a strength, but should you be? So one of the pieces of advice I get is like always question whether you should be strengthening a strength or strengthening a weakness, because being uncomfortable and doing something out of your zone, that's growth, right? How do you learn if you don't get things wrong? So that's kind of.
I love that. That's a really good point, actually. I've never kind of heard it like that, but it kind of really rings true to. We had a team kind of quarterly meetup, in-person meetup recently, and a lot of it was around the training aspect of areas that people need to improve and develop, but then a lot of it was also around, are people in the right roles? And I think that sort of speaks to that of, actually, just because somebody's potentially weak in one area, does that mean they necessarily need to be strong in that area? Or actually, could they double down on something that they're really good at? And then I guess you kind of think a little bit more about how you're training and developing people, but I can see that being a very applicable point across lots of different areas in business. So a nice way to draw to a close. Well, look, thank you very much for coming in and speaking with me. Really enjoyed the conversation, and wish you all the very best with Ninja Owl and continuing your innovative work at Verifymy. So please do come back in, have another chat with us at some point in the future. Would love to chat with you again.
Great stuff. Thank you for having me.